So I am going to argue that we should be paying more attention to boys and men. I'm going to do that just after you've heard from Hillary Rodham Clinton. And I'm going to do it on Equal Pay Day. In case you didn't know, it is literally Equal Pay Day today. So, I had some tough gigs in my time. But also, in case you're wondering, I am the president of something called the American Institute for Boys and Men. But if you're detecting an accent, you're quite right. I'm not from here originally. I became a US citizen in 2016. I became a citizen on the very last day that you could register to vote in the 2016 election. I was determined to do it, so I became a citizen. So I also want to thank you for having me. I was born on the 4th of July. I love this country. And my modest policy proposal is every high schooler should go to a naturalization ceremony. Hands up who's been to a naturalization ceremony in the audience, right? And put your hand down if it wasn't an amazing experience, right? Keep your hand up, it was fantastic, right? Very moving. And I think if you don't go through that process of understanding what an incredible blessing it is, then I think you don't appreciate it. And every year on the anniversary of becoming a citizen, I take out the letter from President Barack Obama, and I read it again, and it talks about the rights and the responsibilities of citizenship. And I think we just heard a little bit about that now. But I'm going to make 5 points, and then we're going to bring on my fellow panelists. My 5 points are as follows. Number one, it is true that many boys and young men are struggling, facing real challenges. Number two, it is also true that there are many issues still being faced by women and girls. Number three, we do not have to choose between those two. It is not a zero-sum game. Point number four, if there are real problems in a society and they're neglected, they're not paid attention to, that creates a very dangerous vacuum in our culture. Point number five, we have to rise together rather than pointing our fingers at each other. So just to put a few data points on this, I don't want to go on too long for sure, because I want to hear from AJ and Saul for sure. But I'm going to put a few stats out there. I'm a policy wonk by background. One of the mottos of the new think tank is keep it boring. It must be boring. And as one of my sons said when I told him that, he said, well, you're the man for that job, Dad. Because among their many blessings is that young men can be really funny, right? But I do have some stats, and some of them are quite troubling. But just in terms of education, in the average school district now, boys are almost a grade level behind in English. There's no gap in math. I discovered a stat the other day, which was that 23% of boys during K-12, 23%, have been diagnosed at some point with a developmental disability. Now, that's relatively old data, and of course, pretty soon all our education data might be a bit old if we're not careful. But nonetheless, it's close to 1 in 4, and it's twice as many as for girls. If close to 1 in 4 of our boys are being described as disabled, I'm going to suggest that maybe there's something about the school system that's disabling, rather than there's something wrong with the boys. And it's no one's fault, but I do think that the way in which the school system sometimes interacts with boys is just accidentally to treat them like they're malfunctioning girls. Right? They're just not quite acting in the way that the system suggests. And it's one of the reasons why I'm so supportive of the efforts that we're going to hear a little bit about to get more men into the classroom. The share of K-12 teachers who are male has dropped from 33% to 23% and continues to fall. So we have less male representation in teaching as a profession now than we do female representation in issues like STEM and law, etc. Should we do more? Yes, on the other front, but yeah. There are some real problems. 2/3 of men said in an Equimundo survey that no one knew them very well. 15% of young men say they don't have a close friend. And most tragically of all, we've seen an incredible rise in the loss of life from suicide among young men. We lose 4 times as many men as we do women. Every one is a tragedy, of course. And the biggest rise since 2010 has been among young men under the age of 30, where the rise has been somewhere between 30 and 40%. We lose 40,000 men a year to deaths from suicide. The increase in drug poisoning deaths among men just since the beginning of the century means the loss of an additional 400,000 men. The increase is an additional 400,000 men. That's the number of men we lost in World War II. So the increase in deaths from drug poisoning, or so-called deaths of despair, is the equivalent of losing a world war's number of men. Right? These are bleak statistics, I know. But I'm sharing them with you because I really want to emphasize the point that there are lots of things we can worry about with regard to our kind of boys and men. It's true. These are not confections. These are hard facts. But it is also true that there are many areas of life where we have to do much more for our women and girls. I said it's equal pay day. It's still 83 cents on the dollar, etc. 25% of members of Congress are women. And just in case it needs to be said again, probably doesn't today, it's like we haven't had a female president yet. I love this country, but what's all that about? Come on. So is there more? Only 10% of female CEOs in the Fortune 500. And only 3% of venture capital money goes to female founders. These are big problems. Both. Point number 3, but we don't have to choose. It's not a zero-sum game. It's like saying to the parent of a son and a daughter that they have to care about one of them rather than both. As the Surgeon General, who I know has spoken here before, said, I've got a son and a daughter. I'm going to care equally for both of them. And they might be struggling in different ways, but we don't choose to care about one or the other. But sometimes it's been framed that way. Sometimes it's felt as if somehow to talk about the problems of boys and men means you're less committed to the issues of women and girls. That's not true. But people's fear about that, people's fear that somehow to talk about these issues of boys and men will make you a closet reactionary or misogynist, or that you've gone over to the dark side, means that people are reluctant to talk about it, which means the only people talking about it all too often and online are the ones who are, in fact, the ones who are most worried about. Has to be us rather than them talking about this issue. Because if we neglect these issues, point number 4, they don't go away. They can, if we're not careful, metastasize into grievances. And that's what happens to neglected problems. If they're real and they're neglected, then pretty quickly people start to say, hang on, what about me? And I think that's what's happened in too much of our culture right now, is because of our kind of reluctance to just talk in this non-zero-sum way about here are some ways in which boys and men are struggling, here are some ways in which women and girls are struggling, and by the way, especially boys and girls, young men and young women of color, or from working class backgrounds. Because of that reluctance, it's just created this huge opportunity for others to fill that space, to fill that vacuum. Which brings me to my final point, which is I really worry right now about the way in which, candidly, people on both sides of the political aisle are very often encouraging young men and young women, girls and boys, to see in their problems the villain as the other. And so you'll see young men, particularly online, being told, yeah, you are struggling. Yeah, it is difficult right now to figure out how to be a man and what to do. You're being told what not to do, but you don't know what to do. I know what to do, follow me, etc. Online. So they're being told. And then they say, you know whose fault it is that you're struggling? It's women's fault. It's feminism's fault. It's the result of women's progress. That's why you're struggling. So we need to go back. Finger point at the women and the girls if you're struggling. But let's be honest, on the other side too, there has also been a sense among kind of young women and kind of girls, it's like, you're struggling, you don't feel like society's fair, you know whose fault it is, it's their fault for all their toxic masculinity and their mansplaining, etc. And so there's a tragic irony that just at a moment in human history where you would want young men and young women, boys and girls, to be arm in arm, fighting for a better society, a safer planet, etc. Arm in arm. Instead, we've got them pointing fingers at each other, blaming each other. The way in which gender politics and gender discussions are going on right now, they're so divisive. And we've ended up making people feel like it's their fault, etc. And that cannot be right. I understand why we had the motto for quite a long time, the future is female. But of course it can't be. And nor can it be male. Right? The future has to be for all of us. For our boys and for our girls, our young men and for our young women. If we're going to rise at all, we have to rise together. And that's the message we need our leaders, teachers, social workers, politicians, etc. speaking about. And the best answer to an online guy you're worried about is a real life guy in real life or a real boy. And with that, I'm delighted to bring onto the stage Saul and AJ to see what they're doing. And come onto the stage, guys. We're going to have a conversation. Are we switching to these? Yes? All right. So I just want to say, have a seat, guys. This is going to be incredibly honest. we didn't really prep for this, and so I just want you guys to say what you think and what you're working on. I just want to say by way of background that both AJ and Saul are working in their schools, and there are some kind of young men's health groups that you're involved in, etc. And so one thing I do want to know is how the girls in your schools are reacting to you doing this stuff around men. So that's one question I want to get at. But first of all, just anything you want to react to from what I've said or your own experience. We'll do you first, Sal.
I would go off of. Oh, I can circle back to a conversation we were talking about earlier. How, like, at least within schools, boys don't really have like really a place to go to with being vulnerable and whatnot. So I can say like the space that Justin are able to provide for us. I feel like that's like just want to share gratitude or share grace for it.
To have that space. And what do you do in that space that you think you wouldn't be able to do elsewhere? Maybe you can have a go at that, AJ. Like, what does that space offer you that would be harder if there were, say, girls around or teachers around?
The space, if girls were around, it would probably be more difficult to discuss how boys really feel about each other, because a lot of men don't like to discuss like their true feelings or whatever the case is around girls, because the girls will probably think they're like losers or whatever the case is and show less masculinity. That's how men see it in their eyes. So when it's a group of boys going through the same scenario, then it will probably be a lot better. So it helps us with our mentality and what we can do to help like us mentally, like education-wise, just get the help that we need when we're doing these groups and stuff. So.
Thanks. And do you think that we're talking a lot about mental health in a way that I think is incredibly positive. Do you think there are differences in the way that the mental health problems of boys and young men are typically expressed or not expressed than there are for young women? Do you notice any difference, Sal, in terms of just how this crisis I think it's correct in some ways to talk about a crisis. Like, just think about your friends, your peers, like,
yeah.
when do you worry about them? Oh, you have notes.
Yeah, I do. So I ended up writing down men/boys nowadays are scared to be themselves due to fright of failure. And I feel like that comes from, honestly, where it stemmed from was social media is like very big nowadays, right? So you have different points in life to the point where people compare themselves saying, oh, I should be here doing this, and that, instead of focusing on what they have on their plate. You know, I feel like, for example, a lot of people in my school, or at least a lot of boys that I know, we're all like, we have this like get rich scheme, or like just bring in just money in general. Like, we all have this one idea, and like comparison eventually, well, we all say comparison is a thief of joy.
Wait, so you're saying there's a sense of like, to succeed, you have to have all this kind of material stuff, this kind of, where's that coming from? Is that online? Is that from each other? Like, where's that pressure come from?
I feel like it comes from online, because it's like the network is like such a global scale. It's like we're able to see like things we're not supposed to. I feel like it's gotten so big that it's like we're able to see, like, for example, if we don't know somebody in Florida, we see that on our phone. And then we just compare that to them, thinking like we should have what they have.
Yeah, and there are a lot of guys online, right, who are just kind of like ripped and rich and all of that, and some of them are jerks, to be sure. But nonetheless, it's there, right? It's in the air. I think a lot of boys are feeling that. What about kind of more positive ones, AJ? When you think about, I mean, I know some of your family are in the audience right now, so. I don't know how honest you're going to be able to be. Let's pretend it's just us, okay? Who are the kind of in real life men that you look to as kind of providing role models? We talk a lot about online, but what about like in real life?
I would say in real life, for me personally, I look up, like male figurative wise, I look up to people that want to go like farther in life, have better goals, achievements, maintain what they're standing on. And I look up to that because I don't want to be like just doing what everybody else is doing, because I want to do my own thing. I want to help myself and provide for myself when I'm older, especially like in this day and age and stuff, because stuff is like way more expensive than it used to be. So when looking up to somebody, like they are financially stable, mentally stable.
Can you give examples? Like, who are you thinking of when you're saying all that? Are there particular men that you're thinking of?
in your life?
I can't really like picture about the exact person I'm thinking about. It really depends on how I see that person. Like it could be somebody at my school, it could be you, it could be anybody in this room, to be honest. But if I admire them for like being who they are and standing on top of their business, then I look up to them and admire them for what they're doing for
Yeah,
themselves.
thank you. And what do you think about the messages that you're receiving from everybody, a bit probably from culture, from online, etc., about what does it mean to be a man, or what's good about being a man today, or what makes a man good? And I'm going to invite you to kind of just reflect a little bit on that when you kind of think about like you're both young men now, and you're going to grow up to be older men and really old. What does it mean to be a good man in today's world to you?
That could bring a lot of different opinions. I feel like one that really stems out is, can I use a father as an example?
Of course.
So I feel like to be a good man, there's being a husband, and then there's also being a father. I feel like being able to tend to both and being able to balance out. That could be like with whichever general aspect you want to use for it. It could be going to work or going to school and whatnot. But I feel like
That's great.
you're able to tune into two different things at the same time. It's like being about your business. It's like getting work done, but also being able to be like emotionally vulnerable within yourself too. I feel like it's not just, oh, you gotta work all day, you gotta bring in money, but it's being able to. I like one of the points you made in multiple of your interviews, where it's like, you gotta have your masculine and your feminine side too. Just being in tune with both. I feel like that's my main point.
Well, I love that. Thank you. It's beautiful, actually. There's something about what. It's interesting that what you went to there was, you went to relationships,
Oh, yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You'd said husband, father, but then you started talking about what that meant in terms of the relationships. And I think that one of the myths, I think, online now you'll find is that somehow to be a real man, of course you should be independent and to look after yourself, AJ, as you said, but also like there's this movement online of men going their own way. I don't know if you've heard about that, which is like men breaking away from society in this sense that they're supposed to go. I think it's the opposite. Actually, I think real masculinity is about your relationships. I think it's about giving more than you get. I think it's about being present, whether it's in your marriage or your relationships and being a father, right? That's what I heard you talking about. You were talking about the guy in relationship to somebody else, his kids, his wife, right?
Yeah, like another point that you talk about is, what's it called? Is men needing the need to be needed. Does that make sense?
Yeah, okay. Well, there's a danger now that you're kind of quoting stuff at me that I'm going to emphatically agree with. That's great. I think that's so true. AJ, I want to bring you in too on this as well. Because when you think about it, you're a little bit younger, right? You're a ninth grader. Am I getting it right? Yeah. As you think about like going forward to be a man, what do you think? What do you think makes a good man? What do you think when you look at saying, yeah, he's a good man. He's the kind of man I would like to be.
To me, to be a good man, to me, it's about respect, how you handle things, your emotions, your mental, and like you said, relationships. Mentally, you really gotta like really be there and just make sure you keep it calm at all times. To be respectful is when you're around someone, just keep it at a swivel, either around another man, around another woman, because most of the time when boys around another man, we change personalities most of the time. We act tough, we act like we're bosses, whatever the case is, but when we're around females, we act different. We either sometimes soften up, some men soften up around girls because, they see a girl and they're like, oh, she's really pretty, and start to like get in that mode, like, oh, I want her. So,
Keep going.
and when it comes to handling situations, like say let's say you and another male are fighting over a female, right? And she's probably, let's say in this scenario, she's instigating about it. Now you two are so just in love with this girl or whatever the case is, and you don't realize that both of you are saying hurtful things back and forth, and y'all could be very close friends and spilling each other's business to each other because of this one girl. But if you're really depending on how you are as a man, instead of just arguing back and forth, look at it in a different way. Just make it like, you know what? You could have her, you could do whatever. It's okay, but just don't make it seem worse and worse as it is.
Right. And don't literally end up fighting.
Yeah, to cause an altercation.
Over it. Yeah, well, it's very interesting that you both, in different ways, you came back to relationships. So in the course of that conversation, we've talked about fatherhood, a relationship with kids. We've talked about marriage or a romantic relationship, what kind of partner you are. And now, AJ, you're talking about what kind of friend you are and how as friends you, whether it's a girl or not, I'm not going to ask you to name this girl who you're obviously thinking about. Like a girl is like, what is a friendship like, especially when it's tested around a kind of moment like that. And so what you both ended up, and I appreciate you having looked at the stuff around kind of feeling needed. I do think that men need to feel needed. I think everyone needs to feel that. And that we haven't done a good enough job yet of making enough men feel needed. But you both landed on a relational definition of masculinity, where what it means to be a good man, what it means to be is in relationship to other people and what you're doing with and for other people, which is the exact opposite of what's being sold online to so many of our young men now, which is like, you do your own thing, you be your own guy, don't worry about them, be an alpha, etc., don't be a loser. And you both articulated an incredibly beautiful alternative to that, which is that masculinity is not defined in opposition to other people, it's defined with other people and how you are with other people. And I got to tell you, I spend a lot of time worrying about boys and young men. And then I have a conversation like this, and I just feel incredibly excited about the future, because the way you both are talking about this, the work you're doing and the work you're doing with your teachers and so on, you just make me incredibly excited about the future of men and masculinity and the world in general. So thank you both very much.